Flat Earth, Aliens, 666, and the War Against Yeshua. As I began to do this research into what I now refer to as Biblical Cosmology, I began to wonder if the globe wasn't actually part of the great deception, the strong delusion. We see in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, beginning in verse 9, it says, "The coming of the lawless one, the Antichrist, will be accompanied by the power of Satan. He will use every kind of power, including miraculous signs, lying wonders, and every type of evil to deceive those who are dying, those who refuse to love the truth that would save them. For this reason, for the reason that people would rather listen to the devil and who refuse to love the truth, for that reason, God will send them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. Then all who have not believed the truth but have taken pleasure in unrighteousness will be condemned." That's pretty serious. God himself sends a powerful delusion. The word translated into powerful is the Greek word energia, meaning working, action, productive work, activity, in the New Testament confined to superhuman activity. And the word delusion, well, that's our word plane again. Talked about that in the previous sessions. Plane, a feminine noun derived from planeo, deviant behavior, departure from what God says is true, and error, deception which results in wandering, roaming into sin. This is the root word from which we get the word planet. All right, keep that in mind. Now, as I started to question the planet, I started looking the stuff up, and I just did a Google search one day. I said, I wonder how fast, because everybody, including Creation Ministries, everybody's out there trying to tell us that heliocentricity is true, right? So I'm looking at it. Well, how fast are we allegedly going around the sun? So I just did a little quick search on my phone. Speed Earth revolves around the sun, and this is what it came up to be: 30 kilometers per second. It says the Earth orbits on average 93 million miles from the sun. This distance is defined as 1 astronomical unit, AU, taking 1 year to complete an orbit. The Earth revolves around the sun at a speed of 18.5 miles per second. 18.5 miles per second. So I thought, well, what does that come out to per hour? Well, 18.5 miles per second times 60 seconds times 60 minutes gives you 66,600 miles per hour. Huh. So then, as I was looking into the alleged size of the ball, nearly 25,000 miles in circumference, the math for calculating curvature, this is not flat earther math, mind you, this is ball earther Eratosthenes type of math. The rule of thumb is essentially 8 inches per mile squared. Okay, so curvature math is 8 inches per mile squared. Well, first of all, 8 inches is 0.666 of a foot. Then as I'm looking at curvature math, I'm seeing that 1 mile equals 0.666 feet of curvature. 10 miles is 66.666 feet. 100 miles is 6,666.66666 feet. Starting to see a pattern here? Then I looked into the tilt of the Earth, and the Navy website that I was on that was giving all kinds of statistics and everything about the Earth said that the Earth's tilt was at 23.4 degrees off of center. Well, if you have a 90-degree angle, 90 degrees minus 23.4 equals 66.6 degrees off of center. Huh. So, at what point do we have to acknowledge this is not just a coincidence, that so much of the things we claim to believe about the globe just so happen to have a direct correlation to the number of the beast? Is that just a coincidence? Oh, and the gravity, right? We got to talk about gravity here. Supposedly this guy got bonked on the head when? Oh, in the year 1666. He gets this idea for, formulating the theory of gravity. And people say, oh, he was a Christian. Well, he quotes scripture a lot, but then again, so does the devil. We're supposed to know them by their fruits, not by their ability to quote scripture. And because, again, the devils know scripture too. And when you look into some of the things that this guy was involved with, he was into the occult big time. He was an alchemist. And he was into Freemasonry and Rosicrucian and all that kind of stuff. He was into a lot of things that Christians should not be into. You can read those books to find out more for why I say that. Now, as I was doing all this research, I found another guy, he's actually a friend of mine, who very much believed in the globe, and he has a website called godtype.com, And I saw this graphic on there where he was doing measurements from the coastline of Antarctica to various locations on the Earth, on the globe. And I think all these measurements are in nautical miles, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, you can see from, like, for instance, this location right here to the Vatican obelisk is 6,660 miles to the Vatican obelisk, 6,660 miles to the Temple in Jerusalem, 6,660 miles to the Washington obelisk. He's got all these different measurements and things on the globe from the coastline of Antarctica to a variety of locations on the Earth. Just a coincidence? I mean, yeah. At what point do we have to say, maybe there's something to this? Now, you might be saying, wait. I thought you said that Yahuwah sends a strong delusion, right? 2 Thessalonians 2:11 said God, Yahuwah, is the one who sends a strong delusion. So, if that's the case, why is all this connected to the number 666? Did Yahuwah create a world that would be linked to the beast? No, I believe he built this place in such a way that, depending on our preconceived biases, could be observed at least two different ways. Similar to the old lady, young lady illusion. You've probably seen this before. Now imagine if I was the one that made this drawing. And let's say I did it to illustrate a beautiful young lady looking away. So this is, her eye, her nose, this is her cheek, her chin, her ear, right? Let's say that's the way I drew it, that's the way I intended it. But you came along and looked at it and said, wait a minute, I see an old lady with a big nose looking toward the left. See? Big nose, eye, the necklace of the young lady is the mouth of the old lady and the chin. See? You're like, you made an old lady here. Now, is that my fault? Well, if I intentionally drew it in such a way that it could be perceived two different ways, then yes, I would be responsible for creating an illusion. So it may be with this. Now, again, this is not thus saith the Lord. This is thus thinketh Rob. All right. Could it be that Yahuwah is asking, are you going to believe my word, or are you going to side with Luciferians, occultists, Freemasons, Nazis, NASA, and science, falsely so called, which are all based on the beast system? If the former, then you will see the earth as Scripture describes it. If the latter, if you have not a love for the truth, as it says in 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 12, then you will see everything through the lens of a lie. Now that said, please note that nowhere in Scripture do we find those numbers, 666, associated with the earth. We get the size, tilt, orbital, and rotational speeds and other such measurements from those who contradict Scripture. We don't get those from Scripture, so we can't blame the 666 coincidences on Yahuwah. Well, you might be thinking, I don't know, Rob. This is too big a conspiracy. Yep, I hear this one all the time. It's too big a conspiracy. There's no way. All the people that are involved in the military and space programs and pilots and everything else, what are they all in on it? It's too big a conspiracy. No, not really. Look into compartmentalization if you want to understand how something like this could easily be pushed on us without it being too big a conspiracy. And for an example, I would point to the Manhattan Project. Just look at how many people and how much money was involved in that one project alone. I mean, if you and I were working on that project, you would be in the office next to me, and you would have no clue what I'm doing, and I would have no clue what you're doing. As I understand, the Vice President of the United States didn't even know what was going on. So the Manhattan Project alone is a microcosm that we can look at and see how compartmentalization works. And I could summarize it by saying the mechanic doesn't know what the king knows. But if you really want to dive deep into how various nations could easily be, quote-unquote, in on it, I recommend you check out these books right here. Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Story of the Committee of 300 by John Coleman, and, of course, Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. Look into organizations like the Illuminati, Freemasons, Jesuits, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Meetings, Bohemian Grove, Committee of 300, Circle of 13, and this is just the tip of a very big iceberg of control. All right? Only the people at the very top would have to be in on any worldwide conspiracy. Everybody else, they're just going to believe whatever they're told or just do whatever they are assigned to do within their compartmentalized lifestyle. And then when you realize that we only have an illusion of choice when it comes to the information that we receive, whether we're talking about textbooks or mainstream media, you got to realize how few control so much. For instance, it is well known that just 6 corporations control just about all the media that we see, hear, and read. I'm not sure when this graphic was done. This says 232 media executives control the information diet of 277 million Americans. I believe there's well over 300 million Americans now in our country. But just going by this statistic alone, that's one media executive to 850,000 subscribers controlling the narrative. Now let me ask you, what government is trustworthy? Do any of you honestly believe the U.S. government is trustworthy? I don't. Reptilicans or Democrats, they're all the same, right? 2 wings of the same bird of prey. I don't trust any of them. What about Russia? Is Russia trustworthy? Oh, what about Israel? Is Israel trustworthy? China? Korea? Japan? Pick a country. What government is trustworthy? It doesn't take much research at all to find that governments are full of conspiracies. Pick a nation. You're going to find tons of conspiracies. And then when it comes to the military, well, the military answers to its government. And I was in the military. I served in the 1st of the 110th Air Cav for 8 years. And I can tell you, the private doesn't know what the sergeant knows. The sergeant doesn't know what the lieutenant knows. The lieutenant doesn't know what the captain knows. The captain doesn't know what the general knows, and so forth. Talk about compartmentalization. And all of them answer to the government. And each soldier is trained to keep secrets, in case you're captured. You can't be giving away the secrets of your military, your government. And with this in mind, space programs also answered to their government, which we just established is not trustworthy. And many of the astronauts served in the military. 216 out of 375 astronauts have served their country through military service. At least as of the time that I grabbed this graphic a few years ago. So now you have space agencies answer to the government, military that answers to the government, and astronauts that have military backgrounds. Pretty easy to understand how they could keep secrets under those circumstances. All the nations who signed the Antarctic Treaty are suspect in my mind. That's the one treaty that has never been broken, and everybody that's any kind of nation of influence has to sign that thing. And I don't have time to go into it here. You just have to do your own Google research on everything that's involved with the Antarctic Treaty. As far as I'm concerned, anybody that has signed that thing is suspect in my eyes. So that means that all the other space programs of other nations, they're all in on the same thing. If they understood what happened with Operation Deep Freeze and they signed the Antarctic Treaty, then as far as I'm concerned, they're just as suspect as the United States and NASA. And of course, when it comes to NASA, well, I mean, it's pretty much full of secret societies. It was founded by occultists, Luciferians, Freemasons, and Nazis. And many of the astronauts themselves were Freemasons or members of secret societies. And guess what? Secret societies keep secrets. I know it's crazy. But it's true. Now, I often hear people say, well, my cousins or my brothers or my sisters or my uncles or somebody I know or works at NASA. Ooh, wow. Okay, so what? Most people are just doing their job and they have no reason to question it. They build stuff. They read data on computer screens. Oh, and they lose track of their space vehicles when they go over the Indian Ocean. Well, that's rather convenient. And in that regard, listen to what Jaron Campanella has to say about some of the things that he discovered when he was looking into this very topic.
NASA is all about imagination, about the awe of space and getting people involved in that. George A. Keyworth was the science advisor to Ronald Reagan. He said to Congress in 1985, all government agencies lie part of the time, but NASA is the only one I've ever encountered that does so routinely. Okay? How about this quote I found from a Los Angeles Times 1987 article or something like that, the middle quotation there, he says, all of the organizations that I have dealt with, the only one that lied is NASA. Science advisor Keyworth said today. The reason they lie, of course, is because they are wrapped up in a higher calling. Can you believe that? In their eyes, these are white lies. They tell lies in order to do what has to be done, because in the end, the result will be for the betterment of the public, so they are not really lying from evil, but nevertheless they're lying. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. One of the things I found recently is this article. I don't know if you guys have ever heard, there's some scientist named Grimes that did some report on how long it would take for a hoax as big as the moon landings to come out. And he basically said, and this is what you'll see everywhere, is that within 5 years, the moon landings would have been exposed. Okay? So I've heard that said over and over again, and people on Globe Believer channels will always say that. And I said, well, let me go look at this article really carefully and see, is that really what he says? So you look at the article, and he says that for a plot to last for 5 years, that all of NASA, when he said that it would last only 4 years, he was saying that all of NASA was in on it. Well, not one of us believes that. Not one person believes that everybody at NASA was involved in the moon hoax. So I started to say, well, did the numbers change? Well, he keeps going down. He says for any plot to last 5 years, only 2,500 people would have to be on the conspiracy. For it to last more than 10 years, you have to have fewer than 1,000 people in on the conspiracy. And for it to last 100 years, you have to have less than 125 collaborators. Well, that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying that only the astronauts and very few people knew. How do we know that? What about all those guys, Jaron, sitting at the consoles? Didn't they know what was going on? Wouldn't they know? They're sitting looking at data. Well, how about Apollo Flight Commander Gene Kranz, who told us in the late 60s our simulation technology had progressed to the point where it became virtually impossible to separate the training from actual missions. The simulations became full dress rehearsals for the missions down to the smallest detail. It tested out the crews and controllers' responses to normal and emergency evacuations, checked out the exact flight plan and procedures. And it says down at the bottom quote there, the simulations were so real that no controller, so nobody sitting at any console or any computer, could discern the difference between the training and the real mission. So then you have to start looking at the NASA missions, and you say, is there anything else that leads me to believe that possibly there was some chicanery going on? How about the fact that they never plugged the live feed into the news agencies? They said, oh, you want to see the moon landing? Come to our facility, and you can film it off of a TV screen. So you have one input coming from who knows where, and you've got all the media who are actually standing there with video cameras filming off of a screen. That's what we got for the moon landings. So there's nobody, so yeah, based on this guy Grimes' study, if there was less than 125 people who knew about the moon landing conspiracy, it could last 100 years. So unfortunately, we probably got another 50 years that we're going to have to deal with that lie.
They lose track over the Indian Ocean. So they build stuff, they put it on this vehicle, they launch it up into the sky, and if you do like a time lapse of these launches, you'll see a very profound arc. Doesn't look like they're going up into space. They go whoop, like that. But they saw the device that they just built get put on that thing and go up. And then NASA loses contact with everything they send up over the Indian Ocean.
Orion's journey is just beginning. As the spacecraft and the upper stage begin their first lap around Earth, Mission Control in Houston is monitoring the progress of the flight. Orion's over 100 miles up and going about 17,000 miles per hour. Just as it passes over the Indian Ocean, we lose communication. This is expected. The communications link we have through satellites to Orion is momentarily lost.
That's convenient. Look that up.
The simulations were so real that no controller, so nobody sitting at any console or any computer, could discern the difference between the training and the real mission.
So there you go. It's as simple as that. The only people that would have to be quote-unquote in on it would be a few hundred people at the most. It would be the people that are sitting on those things on the launch pad and their immediate supervisors. Everybody else, they're just building stuff and looking at TV monitors, getting a feed from who knows where with simulations that are so accurate that even the controller could never know the difference between a real-world scenario and a simulation. The conspiracy of cosmology is no bigger than that of evolution. Just put it in a textbook and no one questions it. I mean, you can look into, and plenty of creation ministries have done a good job on the evolution side, as it pertains to biology and geology, and see all the lies in the textbooks. Kent Hovind's got an entire ministry based on the lies in the textbook. Why they still give a pass to the textbooks when it comes to cosmology after they've just established how many lies there are as it pertains to biology, geology, archaeology, picanology. Why are they giving a pass to cosmology? No, the conspiracy of cosmology is no bigger than that of evolution. Well, why? Why would they lie? What's the motivation? Okay, why would they do it? Well, I think this billboard pretty much says it all, right? In science, we trust. Freedom from religion foundation. Now, myself, I'm not a fan of religion either. I pretty much can't stand religion. I'm all about a relationship. But what's being said here is, no, we don't want to trust in God. We want to trust in ourselves. Science over God. And they have their prophets, the religious prophets of scientism. Scientism being a religion, not science. People who believe in biblical cosmology, they believe in science, real science. Actually, real science confirms the Bible. But then there's this other thing called scientism that is a religion based on belief and faith in ad hoc theories and things of that nature. And these are some of the most famous prophets of scientism. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. I'm sorry, but when you look into the founding of these organizations and the people involved, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that I will ever trust these people. And when I look at their allegiance against God, against his anointed, against the Messiah, and all the things that they do in favor of the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, the beast, the Antichrist, whose number is 666, and all of the things associated with the globe that they push, that just so happen to also, in one way or another, end up equating to some form of 666, I have to be honest with you, it sure does look like, if not the great delusion itself, a big portion of it, a huge portion of it. Evolution is not even remotely plausible without the cosmology that is being pushed in the Copernican model. The whole idea of suns eventually spitting out, or in the process of forming, creating planets that cool in orbit around suns, and the whole idea that all the stars that we see out there in the heavens are suns just like our sun, and likely with planets going around them just like we have planets going around our sun, supposedly. The possibility that some of those could have life on them, to me, all of this is a big setup. And one of the things that I find interesting about the idea that flat Earth is coming out now is I believe we're getting really close to some sort of disclosure event.
After all these years, it finally happened. The US government has come out saying that they've recovered, quote, off-world vehicles not made of this Earth. This top-secret Pentagon report is said to confirm everything UFO researchers have been saying for years. The Roswell crash, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Skinwalker Ranch, all confirmed by actual declassified US government documents. Right now, we're going to take a look at some of the latest articles coming out on this matter. On July 23, 2020, Tucker Carlson shocked the world when he said this on his live Fox News broadcast.
This is a Fox News alert. There are new findings tonight in the search for extraterrestrial life. The New York Times reporting that a secretive Pentagon unit tasked with investigating UFO sightings is quite likely releasing some of its findings soon. And those findings could be stunning, particularly for people who have doubted the existence. The Pentagon has been conducting classified hearings on UFOs for more than a decade. We know very little about what they've found. But apparently, just recovered are off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. That's a direct quote.
The following day, multiple articles were released, going into more detail. The Intelligencer reports on July 24, 2020, quote, the Pentagon has reportedly found off-world vehicles not made of this Earth. Also, Fox News releases an article entitled, quote, with Pentagon UFO unit in the spotlight, reports mention off-world vehicles not made of this Earth. Let's take a closer look at this Fox News article. Quote, a long-hidden UFO investigative unit within the Pentagon will make some of its findings public, according to the New York Times report. The unit, which is now part of the Office of Naval Intelligence, has spent over a decade discussing mysterious events in classified briefings, according to the news outlet. A government contractor told The Times that he gave a classified briefing to the Department of Defense in March describing retrievals from, quote, off-world vehicles not made of this earth. The Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force at the Office of Naval Intelligence was described in a Senate Intelligence Committee report last month. The unit standardizes collection and reporting on unidentified aerial phenomenon, any links they have to adversarial foreign governments, and the threat they pose to U.S. military assets and installations, the report says. However, the committee remains concerned that there is no unified, comprehensive process within the federal government for collecting and analyzing intelligence on unidentified aerial phenomena, despite the potential threat, it added. The New York Times reports that a small group of government officials and scientists believe that objects of, quote, undetermined origin have crashed to Earth and been retrieved, including former Senator Harry Reid. While some have been found to be man-made materials, there are question marks over others. The publication cites Eric W. Davis, an astrophysicist who worked as a subcontractor and a consultant for the Pentagon UFO program. Davis, who now works for defense contractor Aerospace Corporation, said he also gave briefings on the recovery of unexplained objects to staff members of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee on October 21st and October 23rd, 2019, respectively. The article goes on to say, in speaking with the New York Times, Reid said he believes the government and the private sector may have retrieved materials from unidentified objects. After looking into this, I came to the conclusion that there were reports. Some were substantive, some not so substantive, that there were actual materials that the government and the private sector had in their possession, Reid said in an interview. Reid's comments are the latest from the former lawmaker. In June 2019, he told Nevada's KNPR that he wished lawmakers would hold public hearings into what the military knows. He said they would be surprised how the American public would accept it, Reid said during the wide-ranging interview. But why now? Why is the government releasing all this info right now? Why do you think they're so confident people will accept it? Could it have anything to do with the inundation of propaganda material such as ancient aliens and the like?
Yeah, absolutely. Ancient aliens. They're always pushing the Anunnaki and whatnot, that there are ancient alien creators. Evolution has run its course. It's gone completely bankrupt. So even people like Professor Richard Dawkins saying, well, intelligence design, is likely the way it could come about, but it would come about in the following way, that some ancient civilization out there in the universe who itself allegedly evolved from some sort of Darwinian evolution type of scenario, reached a high level of sophistication and came here and seeded our world with the mechanism that made evolution possible here. Of course, it just keeps pushing the problem further out. How did that other, if it requires intelligent design to kickstart evolution, then how did that other allegedly advanced civilization out there evolve? I mean, sooner or later, you got to get to a first cause, and that first cause is going to be God. But this narrative is being pushed on us that ancient aliens have been here before. They were likely our creators, or at least helped kickstart life, and they're coming back. UFO and alien abduction scenarios are being reported exponentially more and more every year. And you got people like Stephen M. Greer out there saying, hey, disclosure is imminent. It's just around the corner. It's going to happen. Although he's been saying some stuff that's rather interesting lately, that he even believes there's going to be a counterfeit version of it. That we have the technology right now that human beings could fake UFOs with our own technology, make people believe that it's alien spacecraft, but it could very well just be black budget DARPA type projects, developed in Area 51, human engineered aircraft that are being used by our government or the governments of the world to deceive people that it's really aliens. He's warning about that.
The military term, so you know it, is a false INW, or a deceptive INW, indication and warning. And it's basically like the Gulf of Tonkin event in Vietnam. You basically exaggerate or hoax an event that then manipulates policymakers. So this was the ultimate takedown of official disclosure, which was about to happen in 1989. Got it? 26 years ago, November 1989. So here we are in 2015, and it took a lot to piece all this together, and I began to look into what the electronics were with this and what kind of technologies they might have. And one bit of insight that the prince had, he said, you know, so he told me that the reason he was funding the abduction groups is that he was convinced that there was an existential threat from outer space. That's been the Sub Rosa plan since the 56. And that he wanted people to hate the aliens enough to pay the blood and treasure of World War III. And he also wanted it to be eschatological, where it would result in the end of the world so that Christ would return and the good folks would go up in a flying saucer, I guess, with Christ. Now, this is what he was telling me. I'm just listening. And I'm going, whoa, this is like, woohoo. And he was completely convinced that this is what needed to happen. This sort of end of the world eschatology is the study of the end of the world event, and that's why he was putting so much money in and providing so much funding to Mack and David Jacobs and, you know, Bud Hopkins and all this. And he told me, he says, I'm going to stop funding John Mack because he's become too positive about contact, and I only want to fund people who are going to put things out there that scare people and make them hate the aliens. He said this. So I went, oh boy. Now this is connecting a dot that all of you better listen to very carefully. It's the last thing you learn today. And that is that there is an overarching agenda that was hatched in the 50s. Remember that psychological warfare document and its value? That was hatched in between 53 and 56 to create the specter of a threat from outer space that does not exist. Werner von Braun stated on his deathbed, and we have the testimony of his assistant, that and said, they will first have the Cold War, then we decided there would be nations of concern, then global terrorism. We have this testimony from before 9/11. Then that would be followed by threats from outer space. They'll start talking about asteroids and things of this sort, but the ultimate one they're going to play is the alien threat, and it's all a lie, and it's all a hoax. But in order for the lie to work, they have had to create a body of disinformation, false information, and frightening scenarios, and actual events that would be convincing to our policymakers like Reagan, convincing to the average person, and to the UFO public that consumes videos, entertainment consoles, movies, etc. And that has been the 50 to 60 year plan. Don't forget that no less a figure than Douglas MacArthur in his last address to the Congress said World War III will be interplanetary. So they have been wanting to provoke an interplanetary conflict for as long as I've been alive, and I'm no spring chicken. And all right, so this gets into a huge problem of how people consume information and can be manipulated through fear. Because if you look at the roots of human warfare, the early days and even today, it's people abducting people, a tribe's women, raping them, abusing them sexually, etc., and so on. This is all stuff that they are simulating and saying that the ETs are doing through these abduction scenarios. It is 100% being done by military special operations that are this paramilitary force. And this is the deep end of the pond. Now, when I discovered this back in 1994, now this is 21 years on, I was told by someone in the intelligence community, don't talk about that, because that's what's really dangerous for you. And it's also what will discredit you, and it will also cause them to hate you the most, because you're defanging their whole war plan. The next big war is not terrorism, it's interstellar. And if you expose that it's a hoax, it takes all the steam out of their plan.
More and more in the last few years, he's been talking about a counterfeit alien disclosure that be 100% orchestrated by human beings in order to push forth an agenda. Now, of course, he's not a flat earther. He believes in the spinning globular Earth model and that there are ancient aliens out there. And he believes we need to reach out to them and, shake their hand and say, hey, let's be friends, and all that good stuff. But, to me, I don't believe, even before I got into the flat Earth, I didn't believe in ancient aliens anyway, or aliens in other worlds. I believed in all along that we're dealing with fallen angel activity and demonic activity and things of that nature. And yet still, we have to acknowledge that we've had constant media bombardment, both in, sort of mainstream news as well as in movies and pop culture and all kinds of stuff, always, always, always pushing this alien agenda, people from other worlds out there. And I mean, we've even had U.S. presidents perhaps preparing us in advance for what they may or may not know is coming and setting the stage for all this.
I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species from another planet outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
We know now we live in an ever-expanding universe. We know that there are billions of stars and planets literally out there, and the universe is getting bigger. We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified outside our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and dense enough that they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
No, I'm trying to tell you I don't know.
Oh.
But if we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope that it's not like Independence Day.
Yeah, right.
That it's a conflict.
Well, now we have friendly
Maybe the only way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right.
So the thing about flat Earth that really intrigues me is it nullifies all of it. If we're in a terrarium, well, there's a creator. And so if there's a creator, then immediately evolution is demolished. And the whole notion of ancient aliens goes out the window too, because everything above us is way closer and way smaller than what we've been taught. So anyway, that's my take on the likelihood that the Copernican spinning heliocentric globular Earth model could very likely be a massively huge part, if not the central part, of the strong delusion written about in Scripture concerning the last days. But if you go back and listen to what Stephen M. Greer was saying, he made reference to the testimony of Dr. Carol Rawson. And, it's important to point out that this interview was done prior to 9/11/2001. Listen to what she has to say.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are a dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable idea. The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in 74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear in the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies. And I will testify before the Congress under oath about everything I have said and more. Thank you.
So, I mean, we can take it or leave it. I don't know what to make of this. I certainly don't trust Werner von Braun. This person seems to be a credible person. She's giving a testimony that, I mean, we can only assume is true unless proven otherwise. But what if Werner von Braun at the end of his life was making a confession of sorts and trying to warn her and telling her to tell everybody else, and, perhaps warning others that, look, what's coming, whatever it is that they may have had information or been privy to, is fake. It's a fraud. It's not real as it pertains to visitations from outer space. I mean, maybe there's a good reason why he had whoever he left behind after he died had them put Psalm 19:1 on his tombstone, of all things, and for Werner von Braun of all people, right? Psalm 19:1 describing the firmament. It's definitely one of those things that make you go, So what's going on then? What's the motivation behind all this? Well, if I was to break down the motivation, I would do so as follows. First, get people to doubt Yahuwah's word by destroying the very foundation of our Bible, Genesis, specifically the Genesis account. 2, set up a new paradigm where God is out and science is in. Evolution removes Yahuwah from the equation. 3, when evolution finally runs its course and becomes utterly bankrupt, introduce the idea of intelligent design, but deny the true designer his due credit and place it rather on ancient aliens. 4, promote the ancient alien theme as much as possible in all forms of media by perpetuating the concept of Earth as a tiny blue marble orbiting an average sun in an average galaxy among trillions of other galaxies in an ever-expanding universe. With so much potential for life to exist in such a vast expanse, the idea of alien scientists being our creators seems a lot more plausible over time and heavy indoctrination. And then 5, The stage is now set for our alien creators to return and bestow upon us their miracles, signs, and wonders. In order to convince us all the more that all religions are false, we then put our trust in them. Finally, when Christ does return, we are all convinced that he is the enemy, and our united world gathers together to make war with him. Now, when it comes to the nations of the world gathering together to make war with him, let's dive in a little deeper here. Take a look at that. The nations of the world intend to go to war with Yeshua. We see in Psalm 2, "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahuwah and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us." Revelation 16. "And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon." And we see in Revelation 19:19, "And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army." That's the motivation right there, at least as far as I'm concerned, folks.